Football Game Plans Fantasy Football starting lineup. I am Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook, joined as always by my teammate, my good friend Chris James. Follow Chris at CJ Florida 9. I'm at FBall Game Plan. It's week 4 in the NFL, and it seems like it's just moving on all along. So we're at one quarter of the season is done, or will be done after this weekend. So Chris, what you think about this week coming up and how it's so far shaping to be a solid week of football on the schedule?
It should be a solid 15 games on the slate. If y'all haven't heard about the possibility of a game getting possibly being postponed, unfortunately. But again, we made it through a quarter of the season with this being the first hiccup. So I'm excited. Some good matches this week. I do want to bring one thing up, though. So I'm a fair person. I believe in admitting when I'm wrong. And so far this year, I have unfortunately steered you wrong with quarterbacks. I was big on Carson Wentz. So far, it hasn't come out. Week 2, I had Tom Brady having a breakout, and he just did not do it. Last week, I told you not to play Josh Allen. My bad. Seriously. And the Trubisky thing, a lot of things. But guess what? You're going to get some stuff wrong. If you look at the rest of the stuff, I've gotten a lot of it right. But I will admit, steered you wrong quarterbacks. If you want to listen to everything I have to say except for quarterbacks, go for
it. Hey, man, listen. You're right about the Josh Allen. It was a head scratcher. But Josh Allen is showing that it was, it's not an aberration. Or it is a sign of things to come.
Yes.
So, and that's cool because this part of the show, we're going to have that aberration or a sign of things to come later on in the show. But right now, as always, how we start these things, the waiver wire. And we're going to start with quarterback. So you get to redeem yourself, Chris, by trying to find a quarterback that's going to be ready to go week 4, that's laying on the waiver wire.
So this should be easy this week, but hey, apparently it's not. So we're going to start off with the first guy who's playing against a secondary that I don't know what happened, but they can't stop any wide receivers. And that's Ryan Fitzpatrick playing against the Seattle Seahawks. They're going to have to score points because Russell Wilson's on the other side of the field. So Ryan Fitzpatrick should be a good play this year, again, with all the points they're giving up to wide receivers in that secondary. Actually, like Nick Foles. Yes, I told you to pick up Mitchell Trubisky last week because he was playing the second worst defense in the NFL behind Seattle's secondary. But Nick Foles came in, galvanized the unit, looked like a real quarterback, threw 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter alone. And they're getting an Indy defense that, honestly, who they face? Jacksonville, who beat them, Minnesota, who couldn't throw the ball, and then the Jets. And we know what the Jets are all about of late. And then the last one is actually someone who I might have given, a little bit of ribbing to in the past, but I think this is a great matchup for him. That's Baker Mayfield. I think that against the Dallas Cowboys, they're going to have to put up points because Dallas has one of the fastest paced offenses in the entire NFL, and they're going to put up points against that Cleveland defense.
Yeah, and the quarterback position is always unique because you have to really be a quote-unquote standout, like trying to throw for 400 plus yards a game. But we're seeing that a lot of these guys are playing good football if it may not translate into fantasy. Nick Foles being one of those guys, and we should see the skill players around him start to flourish. So moving on to the running back position, the waiver wire is probably buzzing right now. Everybody's trying to pick up Myles Gaskin. So who are some of the guys that you're looking around the waiver wire that you're going to pick up for week 4?
So one of these guys is a pretty easy play. That's Carlos Hyde because he's going to get all of the carries this week. We saw the unfortunate injury last week to Chris Carson. I own Chris Carson in a couple of leagues. So he's probably going to get the bulk of the carries. And if they get up big, he's going to get late carries and possibly get in the end zone. Rex Burkhead, sneaky play from last week. This week, not so sneaky. I think James White is out again with that unfortunate thing that happened with his family. So Rex Burkhead is the guy to move in there. And against KC, they're going to have to put up points. So expect him to have a lot of targets this week. And then the guy who I've talked about before, but now he's back in the mix, and that's Nyheim Hines. Listen, he's still floating out there below, like the 50% mark in ownership. I know that there was a lot of carries for Jonathan Taylor. Not every game's going to be like that. And this one against Chicago may be a Nyheim Hines game because they may need to score some points.
Yeah, and also when you're dealing with a team that has an aggressive defense, that ball is going to have to come out quick. And one way to combat that is putting those linebackers in coverage, and that's prime for a guy like Nyheim Hines to really thrive. So I'm surprised that he's only owned in 50% of the leagues out there in fantasy football. At receiver, I see you have one of my favorite options out there in real football from the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, so we talked about Marion Fitzpatrick, and I think Preston Williams should have a big game this week. He hasn't shown up yet this season, but think about it. Seattle's given up all the points to receivers. There's still a leg injury with Devontae Parker, so Preston Williams can be the guy to lean on this week in what should be a high-scoring, high-flying game. Another guy is actually Cole Beasley. Listen, in fantasy football, it's a volume game, and the middle of the field is working. He's gotten at least 6 targets in all 3 of his games to start the season. Let's see what he can do this week in a matchup against Las Vegas where points should be put up. And then the last guy is actually, again, a volume play. Greg Ward. Apparently, the Philadelphia Eagles, no matter who they bring in, they have a mandate that the receivers must get injured, and Greg Ward needs to be the number 1 receiver that week. So this is the week for him against San Francisco. I think that he should have, anywhere from 10 to 12 targets.
I'm amazed at how many injuries. The Eagles released their injury report today, and I felt like half the roster was on it. And not just, limited and, coach's decision not practicing. A good bulk of that number didn't practice at all. It was like, wow, they have a lot of guys that are banged up. I don't know what it is out there about those guys that they just continue to get banged up and really just curtail on paper. When you look in the preseason, like, man, they have a really good roster on paper, but these injuries, man, can't control. And I tweeted this out a couple of days ago, or maybe it was yesterday, when I said that hopefully people have a better appreciation for, OTAs, mini camps, training camp, preseason, because we're seeing this year the injuries are just sky high across the board.
If you look at the injury report from this Philly-San Francisco game, it looks like the end scene from the movie Dickstown. Like, it looks like everyone's just gotten beat to high hex. Like, there's so many injuries on both sides of the ball. I'm surprised they'll be able to field a game.
Shout out for the Dickstown reference. Luke Gossett Jr., one of my favorite action actors. Tight end position, Chris. Who we got on the waiver wire?
So I'm only going with 2 guys this week because, again, tight end, I think, is one of these positions where you already scooped them up, considering that some of the big names have been out. But I'm going to go with Jimmy Graham. He had 2 touchdowns last week. He's a jump ball catcher in an offense with a guy who they have confidence in. Nick Foles. I think Jimmy Graham is a guy who's still available in enough leagues to be on the waiver wire. And then Robert Tonyan. Now, there's not a lot of targets going to him, but listen, when you're playing against a team like Atlanta and you're playing at a position that 5 targets is good for, this guy can work out. He has 2 straight weeks of back-to-back touchdowns, so he's got to put on your radar.
Defensively, I know why you have this one defense on here, and it's the easiest matchup for them this week, but it could be tricky, but I expect the defense to do well against the New York Jets.
Yeah, and that's the Denver Broncos. Listen, that defense did well against really good offensive units until some injuries got in their way against the Bucs, but they held the Steelers back, held the Tennessee Titans back in week 1, so this should be a pretty easy matchup for them. Another defense I'm looking at, literally in the same city that plays in the same stadium, heading out west, the Rams against the Giants. This should be the Rams somehow weren't owned until this week. They got scooped up, so if you got them, good for you. And then the last one is a sneaky play. Even with injuries on their side, like the Chargers this week as a defense against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they do everything that Tom Brady hates. They rush the passer with 4, and they have great corners. Even with Chris Harris out, they should have enough depth to be able to cover, since there is no Chris Godwin in the slot anyway.
It's interesting. That defense really gave Patrick Mahomes problems when they played them. And I know people that we, love to joke about will say, but they scored 30-plus points. Like, yeah, but the defense did a great job in making that 30-plus points hard to come by. And if they had a veteran quarterback, maybe they would have won that game, although Herbert did play well. Seeing that he found out he was going to start like 3 minutes before kickoff. Like, oh, yeah, by the way, you're starting this week, kid. And so, so the defense is good. I agree with you with that pick right there because, Tampa Bay's offense, we've seen them have some success the last couple of weeks, but defensively, teams that can apply pressure against a 40-plus-year-old quarterback and that could also make plays in space, they're a very good open field tackling team, could be a sneaky play, like you said.
Yep, indeed. Especially, hey, daily fantasy, something we don't talk about, but that could probably be a really low-priced defense that can get you some big returns.
Big returns, and we will return after we take a quick commercial break and be back with more football game plans starting lineup.
Well, the game of football has taught me so many things, man. Now, think about the huddle we have right now, right? I tell people this all the time. There's a reason why they call it a huddle. People have been huddling all their lives, trying to find ways to enhance each other's lives. The great teams do that all the time. The great teams do that. The better the huddle, the better the team. And so it's simple, man, how if you huddle for all the right reasons, we wouldn't have Ferguson. We wouldn't have some of the challenges that we have in our society. But as we all know, there's always a moment when somebody doesn't belong in the huddle. And yet we have to continue to move on. We got to continue to play. So the game of life, man, is always starting with a huddle. And for me, I'm lucky enough to know that, by the graces of God, man, it's been a nice huddle. It's been a nice huddle. And if I just keep making sure that he's in front of me, I'm gonna be all right.
And welcome back to Football Game Plan starting lineup. Emory Hunt, Chris James at CJ Florida 9. I'm at FBall Game Plan. All right, Chris. Now we're going to get to segment 2 of the show where we love to have questions. Last week we did buy or sell, true or false. This week we're going to help figure out some situationships, so to speak, that are facing some teams this week as they go into week 4. And we will find out if players are, what we saw last week is more of an aberration or a sign of things to come. So let's start out with situationships. Chicago. Tariq Cohen, one of the best electric players in the NFL, out with a torn ACL. Good thing he signed that contract, got his money, but we wish him to full health next season. But he's out. So make sense of that Chicago Bears backfield and who will get the ball more or who's going to be in play more now that Cohen is out.
Sure. So here's how I see it playing out. For some reason, that team continues to give carries in heavy volume to David Montgomery. No shade, no slight to him. Just saying, they continue to give him the ball. That may increase a few carries. He's gotten at least 13 carries in all 3 of the first couple of games. So let's see what's going to happen as they move forward. That might tick up to near 18 to 20. You're also going to see a little bit of play from Cordero Patterson. This may be a week when he gets utilized, but in general, they're just going to keep force feeding the ball. And again, opportunity is something that is heavy in fantasy football, and he's going to get every opportunity to prove that he is a fantasy stud.
And they just brought up Artavis Pierce from Oregon State, the undrafted rookie from the practice squad. So we'll see if he factors in at least on the special teams role or something like that. But next situationship we have, Thursday Night Football. You have Brett Rippon, Boise State star, starting at quarterback, came in last week against Tampa Bay and replacing Jeff Driscoll. So what can we expect from Brett Rippon, number one, and who benefits from him starting in the lineup?
Sure. So from Brett Rippon, because of Jeff Driscoll is a guy who he's accurate when he gets outside the pocket and gets to go deep. Rippon is going to work better on the intermediate and short routes, especially on the interior of the field. So who benefits? The KJ Hamlers of the world and Noah Fant. Those will be 2 guys that should have larger than life games compared to where they're projected, because that's where he's going to have the ball. The other thing is, to be honest, it's a consistency factor. I think that he'll be a more consistent passer than Driscoll was earlier, so you'll probably also see them attempt a few more passes than they may have with Driscoll as their go-to quarterback.
Yeah, that's a good point, because Driscoll is such a high volatile passer. He'll have 3 good passes and 5 bad ones and 2 good ones. And it's so with a guy that you can say, hey, I know he's going to get the ball out quickly. He's going to give those guys, those receivers that we invested heavily in across the board, a chance to catch and run. So I agree with you. That's a good point right there. Now, speaking of the passing game, let's figure out another situationship. We're going to Baltimore. Lamar Jackson off probably his worst game as a pro. And you look at that passing game, and all you see is Hollywood Brown and Mark Andrews. But we know they drafted 2 good slot receivers in Devin Duvernay out of Texas and James Prochet out of SMU. We know they drafted Miles Boykin last year out of Notre Dame. But we still see Brown, and we always see Willie Snead out there. But outside of Brown, who is going to start to emerge in that passing game at receiver, not tight end, but at receiver for Baltimore?
Sure. I have a PSA. Hey, Greg Roman, pretend like your outside receivers can run inside routes. Just
exactly.
At some point, give the guy give him something. So, getting that out of the way, as they continue to evolve that offense, I actually think Miles Boykin, because he runs the largest amount of routes at the receiver position out of the other guys not named Hollywood Brown. And he's a big body guy who runs like a 4.4. So he'll probably be the beneficiary as they move forward. But look out for Devin Duvernay. coaches, when they see something happen in one phase of the game, start to incorporate you in others. That 93-yard kickoff return for a touchdown, they said, hey, this guy's electric. Let's get him in the game. He could be a sneaky play, maybe not this week, but moving forward to get involved in an offense. Really good player out of Texas.
Yeah, he was pulling away from guys when he hit that corner on that kickoff return. Detroit Lions. There's a lot to talk about with Detroit, but especially when you talk about their offense, because there are some players out there, and if they can ever get it all together, they could have a really good offense. So that's a question I wanted to ask you, figuring out their situationship. Who can we trust the rest of the way from Detroit?
So the pass catchers are the people we can trust. And why? Because that's what Detroit, even though they don't seem like they want to do, that's what they end up wanting to do. So you're going to get Galladay. He's going to be a wide receiver 2 down the stretch as this offense gets back in line. You're going to Marvin Jones. He'll have some weeks when he has wide receiver 2 value, but he'll often be a flex and sometimes a wide receiver 4 depending on matchup. TJ Hawkinson. In a league where you've had high-scale tight ends either be injured or you're just not sure who's going to show up. Remember, they spent a top 10 pick on Hawkinson, so he'll be targeted and he can probably get you some tight end 1 value. And in a situation where a 35-year-old running back who was released from a team right before the end of the season ends up getting almost 20 carries in a game or 20-plus carries, they seem to not want to use DeAndre Swift, who is a 3-down back. So you can't trust him yet. Again, stash him, trade for him. You can probably trade very low value. Later in the season, he'll start to kick. But for now, it's the pass catchers and Matt Stafford himself.
Okay, let's look at some aberrations or sign of things to come. And we'll kick that one off with a guy we mentioned earlier in the show, running back Myles Gaskin for the Miami Dolphins.
Listen, so Myles Gaskin is a guy who, he doesn't have elite speed, he doesn't have elite size, any of that. He's an intelligent runner. And in that offensive scheme, they seem to want that. He's getting better week over week. That offensive line, which is super young, is getting better week over week. If you got him on your roster, you can get him. He'll be a flex play for you every week. He'll give you value. The only thing that gets in the way is for some reason, he can't get a carry inside the 3-yard line. Jordan Howard had the most annoying stat line ever. 1 yard, 1 touchdown, 6.1 fantasy points last week against Jacksonville Jaguars. Other than that, Myles Gaskin would be a running back too if he actually got goal line carries. But again, he's going to be a safe play as a flex.
Now, last week we saw a guy that had a breakout game for a rookie in Justin Jefferson with the Minnesota Vikings, over 170 yards receiving on 6 receptions. So he balled out, really broke out and blossomed. And to the chagrin of many Packer fans and Eagles fans watching him go off like that. But was what we saw last week against Tennessee an aberration or a sign of things to come for the talented wideout out of LSU?
So it'll be hard to call that every week consistent play. But what I'll say is it's weird what happens when you give talent the ball. And Justin Jefferson, in my actual draft analysis, was the rookie receiver I thought had the best chance to have the best season simply because of how he's designed and built. He's built a lot like, oddly enough, his teammate Adam Thielen. They do a lot of things very similarly. So again, as they start to use him more consistently and get out of the whole process of using guys not named Thielen, he can be a guy down the stretch that can probably win you a league as they get more comfortable with him.
And I brought up the Packers for a reason, because last week we saw Allen Lazard go off against New Orleans, and it was funny. And this is why, karma is undefeated and timing is always on time. Because as they were talking about them never drafted in the first round, skill player for Aaron Rodgers, Lazard catches a beautiful rainbow deep down the field against the Saints secondary. So what we saw last week for Allen Lazard, aberration or sign of things to come?
I'm going to go with aberration, and here's why. So it helps when there's no Devontae Adams, so he became the de facto number 1 receiver. They also played against a secondary that, in spite of all the talent, basically looked like the football game plan staff playing an NFL game. Like, they refused to cover anyone. So do I think he's going to have even 100-yard games moving forward? No. If Adams is in the lineup, Lazard is not the guy you want. And in fact, he gets slotted to the number 3 guy because Valdez-Scantling will be the number 2. So yeah, it's more aberration, but don't throw him away if you can keep him on the end of your bench because Adams may have another injury.
Listen, and now we get to America's tight end, Mo Alley Cox. I feel like every time I look up, Stu has 2 touchdowns in at tight end. We saw Eric Ebron do that in Indianapolis the last couple of seasons. So maybe it's just the tight end position in Indy that seems to just find their way into the end zone. But what we're seeing from Mo Alley Cox is an aberration or a sign of things to come?
I just think this one is a sign of things to come because Jack Doyle was the starter, but Jack Doyle is more limited athletically compared to Mo Alley-Cox. And keep this in mind. He's a former basketball player, 6'5", that frame. Oddly enough, who's Phillip Rivers' favorite receiver of all time? Oh, former basketball player in that same mold. So a lot of familiarity there with that style of player. I think he's going to become the favorite target of Phillip Rivers since T.Y. Hilton, unfortunately, hasn't been able to produce. So I think this is actually not an aberration.
Yeah, and I mean, you nailed the Mo Alley-Cox last week, and here he is out there on game day scoring touchdowns. So good call by you. We'll take a quick break and be back with your ever so popular and famous starting lineup here on Football Game Plan's starting lineup. Be sure to order your copy of the Go-Go Offense by Coach Brennan Marion on footballgameplan.com/GoGoOffense. Coach Marion goes through the ins and outs of his explosive offense, one that's tearing up the college football field and putting a lot of points on the scoreboard. Again, you can order your copy at footballgameplan.com/GoGoOffense. And welcome back to Football Game Plan's starting lineup. Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook. I'm at FBall Game Plan. That's Chris James at CJ Florida 9. CJ, time for the starting lineup. And I see you have two quarterbacks listed on your starting lineup. You have Lamar Jackson and Jared Goff. Let's talk about why you have those two quarterbacks listed this week.
So I wanted to emphasize Lamar Jackson more than anything. If you have him, you're starting him every week.
Right.
But after the week he put up last week, and the injuries at the Washington, especially on the defensive line, this could be a massive, 50-point outing for Lamar Jackson this week, especially because that offense wants to prove something. So that's why I put him there. But the real starter who I expect to exceed his point total for the week is Jared Goff. I actually think that he's in his zone right now. He's very comfortable. They're putting him on those bootlegs. He looks like the Jared Goff of 2 years ago instead of the Jared Goff of last year.
And that's interesting because, Goff going up against that Giants secondary, really going up against that Giants second level, that linebacking core, because they really do work the short to intermediate area of the field, and those receivers catch and run. He should have a big day. Now, looking at your sitting lineup, we just talked about this guy, his offense, earlier in the show with Alan Lazard, but I see you have Aaron Rodgers on a sit this week. Why?
Sure. And I'm going to reiterate from last show. I expect them to score less than their projections on this side. This has nothing to do with Aaron Rodgers' talent or what he can do. I actually think that he'll start off the game with a first half of 200 yards passing 2 touchdowns and look like he's going to cruise. But I think they'll be a big, so I don't think they're going to throw the ball a lot this week. Probably be a big Aaron Jones and even Jamal Williams game. So if you're expecting him to put up 5 touchdowns like some guys would against Atlanta Falcons, I think that he's actually not going to do that. And that's why he'll get you less value than you might expect in a normal week.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I know you got some great sleepers listed here, so won't you let the folks know who are some guys that you're looking at to have big weeks that no one is talking about right now?
So I mentioned this guy in the waiver wire pickup. It's a guy who, again, I've given some stuff to in the past, but that's Baker Mayfield. Listen, this is a Baker Mayfield game. They're not going to be able to run the ball as effectively, in my opinion, but they'll be able to run the play action. Look for Odell Beckham Jr. to get over the top and then to prove that they can actually throw the ball. So Baker could be a sneaky play, especially in a daily fantasy lineup. From the running back perspective, like we talked about earlier, I like Nyheim Hines this week. Again, more of a daily play, but even in your lineup, he's going to be utilized. He'll probably get somewhere around 8 or 9 catches simply because they'll try to get the ball out of the hands of the quarterback pretty quickly this week. As a receiver, when you're playing against New England likes to do what? Take away your best options. So they're probably going to use J.C. Jackson on Tyreek Hill with a guy over the top and then rotate in some guys to cover up on Kelsey. So look for Mecole Hardman to be a sneaky play this week, much like he was last week. Tight end, we mentioned Robert Tonyan against the Atlanta Falcons. That'll probably be the guy to catch one of those Aaron Rodgers touchdowns. And from a defensive perspective, again, sleeper defense, the Chargers against that Tampa Bay offense. Tampa Bay went off on offense last week against a depleted Denver team. Chargers are depleted, but we saw what they did to, as we mentioned earlier, they did to Patrick Mahomes, aka the GOAT from fantasy perspective. So they might be a sneaky play this week as a sleeper if you're looking for a defense on the waiver wire.
Should be a fun week glad we are, I'm glad the NFL got a handle on the Titans-Vikings situation. Minnesota, no one tested positive, and that's a great thing. They went through 2 rounds of tests, so that's good news. The Titans seem to be the isolated incident, and so they still may be even able to play. Like you said, the game is postponed and not canceled. So that's a unique thing. So let's just see how it plays out the rest of the week. Before we get out of here, Chris, what game is must-see TV for you this weekend?
Ooh, must-see TV game of this weekend. I'm going to go with the one that I just mentioned because I want to see how Cam Newton does against another high-flying offense, and that's going to be the New England Patriots versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Remember, they went up to Seattle and all this stuff. Cam can only run through for 350, put up a bunch of touchdowns. I think the same thing can happen here against Kansas City because it'll be out of necessity because that Kansas City offense is rolling right now.
Yeah, it should be fun. I'm interested in the Bill Belichick, Andy Reid dynamic, the game within the game, Ryan. I call him Ryan Bieniemy because I grew up with a Ryan Bieniemy who's related to Eric Bieniemy, but the Eric Bieniemy play calling, and so that's what I'm interested in seeing and checking out, the game within the coaches. So Chris at CJ Florida 9, I'm at F-Ball Game Plan. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/football game plan. Also subscribe on iTunes to Football Game Plan Podcast and leave us a 5-star rating. We will see you guys next week.